there were pieces of text that were put on the walls that were then painted over in grey. Now, which I find really interesting.
Yes.
Now, in a way, it's particularly resonant given the slight fuss that happened after the book opened.
Yes.
Were you preemptively making statements about things being shades of grey or being in a state of grey?
It's a really nice question, this one, because the grey painting on the wall was done at the last moment. A friend of mine came out, or a chap that works with Anna at the gallery, actually, Chris. We came out to just, sort of do the last minute nuts and bolts. What had really happened was that I'd written the Menzies statement, which is now like perhaps indigenous graffiti. I'd written it large and very clear on the entrance wall. And at the last moment I looked at this and I thought, no, something's been too foregrounded here. It's too smug. I've got to make it more incidental. But while we were painting the wall out, we quickly became, because the original intention was simply to paint the wall out. And we had a whole mixture of paint because I'd become sort of anxious about getting rid of this statement in its form on the wall. And the grey was to back out of the black texture that I'd put on the wall, because we couldn't just go over with the white. We would have ended up having to put down 10 coats, So the grey was meant to just enable us to back out. And so Chris began to paint out the words, and straight away I saw this wonky censorship. And there was another statement further down that was considerably more inane than the Menzies one. And we painted that out with a grey bar, and everything was a little bit falling sideways. And then I started to take over and say to Chris, tilt that a bit more. And then when it was finished, there was this wonderful feeling of something having been blocked out, but the process of censorship all kind of, suffering a mild stroke really, falling sideways. And it seemed to suit everything else about the building. And then I redrafted the statement inside so that people may even think that it was just something had been left and found in situ. But it's a very nice question, because that aspect of working in this building has been extremely interesting, because let me say I walked across the island or around the island and looked at a number of sites with Carol and Christophe Baccargier, and arrived at this site last in company with Anna Schwartz and perhaps one or two other people, and immediately I felt that this was the building. And it's interesting how to know that it was a sort of naval installation, and to read, the young sailors' changing room and so on, just made the whole thing more anxious, I think. And I remembered when I first came to Sydney in '66, there was a sailors' home down in the rocks, and I was unfortunate enough to get a job there. And so every morning I'd go down at 3 or 4 in the morning to clean this place out. And of course, of being sailors, I mean, it was just vomit everywhere. So I thought, well, I might become an artist as a result of this experience, and I did. So I thought of that. So, and then the rooms themselves, I was very interested. I wanted to sort of, because the brief was to sort of, Carolyn surprisingly said to me after seeing some of my video, films of performances, well, we'll go with all of the most difficult ones. And that's a very surprising brief from a Biennale director, really. So the idea was to make that selection and then to spatialise it in here. And I was very interested that I'd been trying to do a labyrinth piece down on Pier 2-3, and we ran into all sorts of problems, OH&S and other problems that became insuperable. But oddly enough, when I found this building and because I was always going to do the selection of videos, when I found this complex and the videos, the two works really were conflated. So I was very interested in the empty rooms and the rooms with projections in them, and that people might walk through this space, and that the disturbance of a particular room would be carried forward into empty rooms, and altogether the whole architecture would be contaminated by my extremity, I suppose. But it's a lovely question. And I'll try to be much shorter on the next, if there's another. Is anyone wanting to ask a question?
Mike, what's with the buckets of urine?
I'll come forward, we keep making it.
What's with the buckets of urine?
Oh, the buckets of urine. Well, I just, having just seen Vernon O'Keefe's installation, I saw it for the first time this morning. It's a lovely installation. It's a similar impulse. I had done a performance in Newcastle a couple of years ago, and they'd provided me with a very large industrial building, and a trade union group in Newcastle, because we'd run into money problems, actually brought together a group of their people, and they built a room, the room that I wanted, which was a freestanding box in this huge industrial space. And then it was at the time, it was the previous government, and there was major debates going on about workplace agreements and so on. And so I recorded a full session of Parliament, and it continued to boom through the day in this empty industrial building. The piece was called Sitting Member, and I sat in the box with the stump of my left arm sticking out of the wall of the box. This was a very difficult image, and everyone sort of approached it with different degrees of interest. It was called Sitting Member, and I put the video of that in that room upstairs. It's a two-camera thing, so you see just a long camera looking back at the audience and the lights changing through the day, and then the other one is the reverse view looking at the arm. And I looked at that whole complex, and it was obviously a latrine and washing area. So I thought I should just rehabilitate some of its character by putting a line of buckets filled with my urine, because I thought the smell will spread through the whole complex, and that it was a sort of necessary realism, a beneficial realism. And we put some of the speakers, which were relaying the parliamentary broadcast, were put into the toilet cubicles. And I think, Parliament goes very well in this setting. So that was the idea. I mean, it was just, I kind of, in the buckets I bought at Bunnings, and they all said, made in Australia. And it was a relief to know that we're still making galvanised buckets in this country. And, it's industrial site, you do these things. Anyone else got another question? Because, yeah.
Hi, Mark. I read in Anna Schwartz's gallery in your big book that you put out in a conversation with Adam Getsky, you referred to the concept of the anti-face in relation to the anti-mask, relating to Kelly's work, Nolan's work on Kelly. I was wondering if you could perhaps elaborate a bit on that.
Yes, that's a nice question too. Yes, that's a nice question too. Sorry.
What was the question?
It was, the question was about an interview that I did with Adam Getsky that's included in this book that Anna and Maury published, in which I'm talking about the anti-face. And I actually specifically mentioned Kelly in his helmet, don't I? Because, the face has been incarcerated there, and it's like, I thought, I'm really interested in this aspect of modernism, because I think that finally some of the strategies of modernism at their most virulent and conclusive are defensive in that way, I mean, I think that Malevich's occlusions, I think his monochromes planted back over the vanishing point, over the eye of God and Renaissance deep space, is an enormously authoritarian prohibition on picturing. So I was very interested in this, and I think there are cultural circumstances in which this kind of prohibition is produced. And I think that the Ned Kelly configuration is very interesting. I'm very interested in self-portrait, and sometimes or often do the self-portrait almost as one eye, because it's just this territory that gets overdrawn and overdrawn until it becomes almost a black field. So this exhausted zone of the self-portrait is very much like, in my mind, the over-defended zone of the Kelly head. And sewing the face was really my response to this prevailing Australian condition. And that the Menzies here is an interesting reference, because Menzies is saying, and this is 1937, and he's saying that we don't have any freak pictures here. Our artists show the sweep and sunshine and the health of the Australian landscape. It's a kind of Edenic condition. We've all been born again, and you know, there's the instrumental problem of our Indigenous people, and a lot of other problems besides, and we can catalogue all of this, and they make us more normal. But this is a beatific abnormality. You know, this is our kind of our transcendent condition in the new world. So I was very interested in this, and I'm just suddenly my memory's gone. Ockwee, the black South African that did the documentary a couple of years ago, said to me, "This is the most extraordinary statement made." Suddenly, because he knew something of Australian history. This is 1937, I think it was 38. We have Goebbels and Entartekunst in Munich. Degenerate art. He said to me, Menzies anticipated all of this. It makes your exhibition an exhibition of degenerate art. I said, exactly right, Ockwee, exactly right. So, sewing the face was really a way of producing this anti-face. It's a bit like this, it's the response to this, it's the response to that. It's the response to Ruddock's claim, or whoever's claim it was in Howard's government, that we don't throw children overboard. That's a defining perversion of desperate refugees to this country. We might go out and feed our Indigenous people poisoned bread and wrap them in infected blankets, and we may shoot them out of hand, but we don't throw children overboard. Well, that comes as no relief at all, does it really? So, in a way, it's this cripplingly childish idea that we're exempt from the sins of our forebearers, that we're all born again in this country, and that we're people of limited responsibility. So my response to this was to sort of sew my face into a knot. I mean, it's ridiculous. You can't possibly re-represent the plight of someone in a detention centre sewing their mouth together, their lips together. But what you can do is you can go out of control in a certain kind of way and sew the whole face into a knot so that it becomes an anti-face. So it becomes like Kelly's head, but it's the articulate form of Kelly's head in a bucket, and it's the articulate form of sort of the monochrome. And I think that this is the nature of contemporary art, that it tries to make these occlusive forms of modernism, it tries to enact a therapy on their manifest limitations and their isolation, and to put them into circulation again in a new kind of way. And there's many evidences of people trying to do that in this Biennale. So is there another question that anyone might want to ask? And I'll walk forward and you'll tell me.
Did your sister's art have any
like reflection on your own art?
Sorry?
Did your sister's art reflect on your art at all? Like, did she have any input into your art at all?
She didn't have any, she didn't really have an impact on my art because I'm somewhat older, you know, 6 or 7 years older, so she began later than I did. But perhaps it reflects the family dynamic and our circumstances in Queensland, and so there are these similarities, and it's very interesting, I suppose, so that it's sort of, perhaps it's in dialogue with my work, and perhaps she's able to elucidate aspects of my work that I can't properly see. So I think that this is very interesting, because I think that the price of seeing, in a perverse way, is a concomitant blindness. It's my awareness of that dialectic of revelation and concealment, but these are inadvertent conditions. I'm not talking about a planned reception. I'm talking about the costs of coherence. And we often forget that, and this is one of the great problems of the political. So are there any other questions? And we'll take one last question and then maybe we should stop.
I ran up to the show and then came back down again while you were speaking. Did you speak about the chicken work when I was gone?
Yes, the chicken work is... No, I didn't.
Oh, okay.
The chicken work is... it's difficult to speak about the chicken work because I don't know that I'm as attached to chickens as I am to dogs, but I have a lot of sort of fellow feeling for all animals. But when I was growing up, it needs a sort of anecdotal, it needs a little narrative, I think, this work. My father came back from the war, not as a farmer, and he bought an existing farm, and should tell this because it's now a supermarket, I think, and a 4-lane highway and suburban boxes. But then it was opposite 3,500 acres of forestry, and I can remember my parents, I can remember what they said. I was very young at the time, but I can remember that they were very excited because it's this Garden of Eden again that I referred to before, which is very interesting. They thought it was a Garden of Eden, and it was a mixed farm, and it had 800 chickens domiciled in collapsing chicken houses. In 1956, when I would have been 11 years of age, there was a fierce cyclone, and for sort of a couple of days we were indoors watching the chooks sort of accompanied by sheets of galvanised iron, which was the roofing of the chicken houses, all sort of being skimmed, you know, across into the forestry. So when the storm subsided, it was very primitive. There was no town water, and we used Tilly lamps, which you used to pump up. It was a different world in the 1950s. The world had half the population that it has today, so we're forgetting this. The chickens all went off the lay. So, confronted by the bill for laying mash, which was bags of sort of cheap grain that we'd mix up for them to eat, confronted by the cost for laying mash, we had to get rid of the chickens. So I can remember when I was young cutting the heads off lots of chickens, and then we'd dunk them in hot water, and then we'd wrap them up in a hessian bag, and then we would pluck them. And I can remember my mental state, because I was holding the chickens and I was cutting their heads off and blood was going everywhere, and it was all very confused in my mind, and I didn't know where one thing ended and another began, so this haunted me for many years. It doesn't haunt me any longer, but this totem murder was a way of sort of talking to my father. it was an extreme way of talking to my father, and so I got him to kill the chickens. And then I began the confusions that were associated with the murder, as I saw it, of all those chickens. And that's what produced that film. And then when I installed this installation, opposite it is Close the Concentration Camps from 2002. And I'm running that extract of statements from the Joint Parliamentary Report on the detention centres. This is a joint parliamentary report, a joint parliamentary displacement, because they're going by the detention centres and they're not seeing the human beings. They're just concentrating on problems of infrastructure, problems of management, problems of barbed wire, really, of razor wire, and the language is peculiarly detached and objective. And I've accompanied those texts on this occasion with Für de Lis, that sentimental Beethoven sonata, but I've run it backwards. You can still hear Für de Lis, but it's now whining in the desert. It's whining. I was remembering George Steiner, the great essayist now dead from the 1970s and 80s, and he wrote a really interesting essay about the European camps, the camps during the war, and this bizarre schizophrenia, you know, where you had, in fact, he was writing about a particular camp commandant pursuing his job of annihilating people during the day and listening to classical culture in the evening, to Beethoven and Mozart for relief in the evening. So it seemed to me to be appropriate to put this over the statements. And then I had the chicken room opposite the Close the Concentration Camps room. I began to become very anxious about this, and I began to move those chickens all over the upstairs floor. They moved down here and then back again there, and then finally I kind of, sometimes happens like this, I sort of woke up in the early hours in the morning and I thought, no, I'm moving them constantly because the real truth is where they make me most anxious. And so I took the chickens back and put them in the room opposite the detention centres, because they're wildly disparate propositions, but they synthesise all of the anxieties I have about political assertiveness, that it reproduces the disorders very often that it wants to address, and it reproduces them as a sort of blind colossus in the background of our psychology, and everything is made fraught and improbable and unmanageable as a consequence. So this was my reason finally for, we've told two stories here. We've talked about the origin of the chicken murder event in the 1970s, and we've talked about how I situated it in the installation. So it's a sort of monumental question and very important. Sorry?
Why did it make you anxious that they were side by side?
I just felt that one was such a kind of revelation of utter personal disturbance, you know what I mean? In an untranslatable form, you know. I find it very difficult to talk about this. I feel quite dissociated in my response, so if you were to jump forward and accuse me of barbarism, I'd jump alongside you and accuse my after image of barbarism along with you. So it appalls me, this work, but and I almost edited it out of the collection. It's sat like a stick of dynamite in the Art Gallery of New South Wales for 77, so that's, no, it was 83, so what's that? That's 17, that's 25 years. and it's never shown. And, you know, I worked on that third film where I cut a lot of pieces together and tried to grapple with the implications of a work like that through the whole film. I made that film over 6 years. It took me 6 years to make it, an enormous struggle, because in those days performance art was you know, just a kind of obscure brand of psychopathology. So I had to find the resources to complete the work and to complete the film. And at the end of the period, the same person that I mentioned before, Bernice Murphy, was the curator at the Art Gallery of New South Wales, and I was leaving for Europe. And I needed some money, and I was always broke in those days. And I went and I premiered the film to her. There was one person at the premiere. And she must have sensed, I suppose, that this film should be immediately buried. So she acquired it for the Art Gallery of New South Wales. And it's now been resurrected in part, only one scene. It's a long film, a 90-minute film. One scene's been resurrected for this exhibition. All these stories.
My favourite thing in the whole Biennale.
Sorry?
Chicken film's my favourite thing in the whole Biennale.
Well, that's lovely. Thank you very much. Now, I think we should end on this note.
Please thank you, Mike.
Before we get someone that... Thank you. Thanks, Judy. Thanks for coming.